Elon Musk pays more taxes than anyone in human history. Jeff Bezos is living off of loans to avoid taxes. Some are calling for taxing unrealized capital gains. And is the rich really paying their fair share? We're going to be talking about all of that and talking about tax loopholes for the rich. And is that really a thing? We'll find out in the third episode of The Echo Chamber. For a future beyond today's narratives, welcome to The Echo Chamber. And we're back for the third episode of The Echo Chamber. And we're again here with Chris Miller. How's it going, Chris?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
I am surviving, which is always where I try to start my day.
Oh, yeah, no, fair. That's probably more appropriate for me as well.
So today we're going to be talking about taxation and tax loopholes and taxing the rich. And we're going to be starting with a video of Timcast. To full disclosure, I'm actually a paid member of Timcast. Generally a fan, although I have had some issues with him at times. And we were going to be going over some of those issues that I have with some of his mindsets today. But Chris and I are going to watch this video where he and one of his employees discuss taxing the rich and tax loopholes, and specifically taxing capital gains. And we'll see how that conversation goes.
Should I do the full disclosure that I do not like?
I'm sure that's going to come across very clearly. All right.
There's the rich folks. They know the loopholes. They can get away. What?
It's let me explain it like this. I don't actually think it's fair necessarily to call them loopholes. Before I owned a business with a lot of employees, loophole seemed to make sense.
Yeah.
When you actually get into all of the taxes, there's no loopholes. There's literally just what the law is. Because the IRS agents know exactly when not a billionaire is going to pay. It's not a loophole. They're just like, oh, you don't got to pay taxes on this for this thing. So the way it's phrased by activists, particularly on the left, they're like, billionaires use loopholes to not pay taxes. And I'm like, when you claim Amazon paid no taxes, what you're basically saying is that they reinvested the funds or their margins were slim and reinvested. The IRS knows that. So it's not a loophole. It's literally the purpose of tax law. So the funny thing I hear from a lot of people is that if we lower taxes, you'll create more jobs and things like that. And that's technically true, but technically not true. There's a happy medium and you have to know where it is. So if I was told, hey, they're increasing the corporate tax rate to 70%, I'd be like, wow, okay, well, we better reinvest that as much as we can. So what would we do here? We'd hire as many people as we could because we're going to lose all that money if we don't. So it's not necessarily true that lower taxes means more hiring or the other way around. It just really depends. But you'll hear from
I'm happy you said that.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. And this is one of the reasons why I can't give up on Tim entirely, because he does at times make efforts to be relatively nuanced and fair, but other times he just completely ignores nuanced conversation.
Yeah, I agree. But like the reason why I'm happy you said that is the corporate tax rate. The entire point of having certain taxes is not just to collect money. It's really to kind of remove the hoarding of wealth more so than to gain tax dollars. Because anytime we talk about a deficit, the deficit is actually what the government is spending.
Yep.
So that means it is taxes that have been spent that haven't been recollected yet or re-pulled back out of the system.
Yep.
So with that understanding, if you have a really high corporate tax rate and the corporation is reinvesting back into the company, as so long as it's not like stock buybacks and things like that, it's actually not a net negative for society, whereas just hoarding a shit ton of wealth is a net negative.
Yep.
So I'm happy he actually was willing to play with that that nuance, because like if you look back in the 50s, back like the post World War era, we had like up to a 90% corporate tax rate. And during that stretch of time, we had the strongest middle class that we've ever had, per capita of dollars to like spending potential of the average family.
Yeah.
So but we actually got so good during that stretch that they put a maximum wage, which is why we have like healthcare and stuff having to be provided through employers and stuff now, because they were trying to incentivize the good people to go to these other jobs because everyone was making enough money to not need to work in hard jobs.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like there's a balance, but yeah, it's the hoarding of wealth that's the real big issue. So
Yeah.
as long as that is an understood concept, I'm willing to have a more nuanced tax conversation. I did not expect Tim Pool to actually like even remotely concede that, given the last few years of things I've seen him say.
Yeah. No, I would agree. The central like solution that we need as far as taxes is getting the people with money to reinvest that money in creating more jobs, more innovation, more business, and getting that money in the economy and circulating.
Yeah. To an extent. I mean, there are social programs that are necessary or not necessary per se, but there are certain social programs that are better served by a non-private organization and not the profit motive. I think it's totally fine to have things compete against those things, but I think there are certain things that are better, like police, for example. I don't want a bunch of different police. I don't want a bunch of different like I'm fine having a socialized police structure. I'm fine having a socialized fire department structure.
Mhm.
I understand an argument for healthcare against it, but I still think that at least a baseline universal healthcare would be a net benefit and would cost us less overall of our GDP being spent on healthcare. So it's like there's arguments to be had, but there's definitely a balance. But anyway, I don't need to
Yeah.
continue to ramble on that without seeing more of the video.
Yeah, I'm on a similar page as you, except like you had indicated, except when it comes to the healthcare, I would be okay with having a government healthcare system that was meant to help all of those who couldn't afford anything better. But I want a healthcare system that is more of a free market and less regulated so that we can bring prices down and ingenuity within the healthcare system up. And I think we could do that with less government. But yeah, that's more a theory when it comes to healthcare, because I know it gets really tricky when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah, no, so like any system, it could be taken advantage of, but any of the places so far that actually provide healthcare as a universal structure
Mhm.
ends up paying less of a percentage of their overall GDP, especially a lesser percentage of the overall spending power of the lower and middle class on healthcare. As of right now, we spend a higher percentage with our more free market version of healthcare than any of the universal healthcares out there.
Yeah.
Dollar
And
for, yeah.
there's debates about quality, and there's the other thing that comes into play with the US is we are one of the unhealthiest just as far as lifestyle and diet. And I think that probably has more to do with it.
Well, that's also because we don't go to preventative healthcare stuff because it's too expensive. And we also have some really shitty protocols that allow corporations to put garbage in food to make things cheaper.
They will say whatever they need to say to confuse you. They will say billionaires don't pay taxes because it's a loophole. And I'm like, no, Elon Musk isn't paying billions of dollars in taxes because he doesn't actually have cash. That's not a loophole. Okay, well, he made X amount of profit last year. And I'm like, and it's locked up in stock.
Wait, but
stocks.
We don't have to call it a loophole, but it is a sort of workaround that is an issue with the ultra wealthy. And well, whatever there are laws created that allows them to pay much less than even an ordinary person does in taxes. And I'll explain to you how it goes. I'm not talking about Amazon, the corporation, but Jeff Bezos, for example, was famously paid something like only $100K, $83,000 while he worked there, but the shares and his net worth was a lot higher than that. So while he was paying a lower marginal tax, his net worth was like in the hundreds.
That's
I understand it's not cash, but
all right, hold on. You want to play a game?
No. I don't support this, and I don't even support a wealth tax. But I'm saying these are ways.
It's not a loophole.
It's just
there
a generic term.
There are laws made for the ultra wealthy that it allows them to pay less taxes than a much poorer person.
That's absolutely not true.
Which part of it?
Absolutely not true. The first of all, the wealthy pay substantially more taxes on average than if you look at the curve, it's a parabolic curve. The higher the income, the more taxes they pay in total. I think, what is it, like the top 1% pay something like 47% of all taxes?
Jeff Bezos on paper
Jeff Bezos pays the same income tax that every American pays. He then pays capital gains tax, and the activists argue that capital gains should be income, and that by not paying the same amount on capital gains as you do on your income, that's a loophole. That's not correct.
Well, as I understand, he hasn't sold a lot of his stocks when he was
allowed
there.
to.
Well, when he was employed there.
First of all,
now he has.
Stock is not cash and can't be spent.
Yep.
So you can't claim that he should be taxed on something that's not money. But let's play this game. I have in my hand a tech deck fingerboard that I put together myself. Now, how much do you think someone will be willing to pay for Tim Pool's fingerboard that he actually uses during the show and does ollies with? What do you think?
$350.
$350? Okay.
$5.56.
It's now Ilad's. Ilad, you got to pay the government $100 taxes income because I gave you that. Simply by that being yours, that was cash. That was a transaction. That's how the taxes work. You now owe money on that. That's income.
I guess I'd be in the hole. But Tim, let me ask you. So Jeff Bezos was getting paid $80,000 a year while he was the CEO of Amazon, and he was worth something like hundreds of millions of dollars because of Amazon stock, and billions. It depends on all the time.
Cash and
I understand. How do you think he should only owe taxes on 83? Calm down, Phil. So you think Jeff Bezos should only owe whatever?
Okay, Elad, how would he pay taxes on money he doesn't have?
I just think there's that's the workaround. So if you have above a certain amount, I think people argue that you should be forced to sell a small amount.
No! Oh my God, Elad, please.
That's the argument. That's not what.
Elad, stop. Just stop. Calm down. Let me explain. If Jeff Bezos could, which he legally can't because there's fiduciary responsibility to a company, meaning one, he has a contract that bars her from selling stock. Okay, unless a certain threshold of stock value is met. Two, if he dumps stock, the stock price collapses and it could cause the company to spiral into a free fall. The stock is used to generate revenue for the company to operate if they're not generating substantial revenues. So if Jeff Bezos was...
So technically, yes, but this is a stupid argument. So he is correct. But the way the tax system is set up makes it so this is how people act because you can avoid paying taxes.
So you're saying if the tax system was different, if the tax system was taxing on unrealized gains, then the system would then adjust so that he could sell stock, is what you're saying.
Well, so the fiduciary responsibility that he has is only if he's actually on the board and he signed a contract or something along those lines that made it so he can't sell. If you make that choice, I don't think that should protect you from cash or from taxes regardless. However, just to give the best version of this argument from their point of view, because again, every technical and definitional thing that Tim is actually saying right now is true. The issue is he's only deciding that the only thing that exists as wealth is cash. And so, yeah, they're hinting at a wealth tax, but they're also kind of conflating a wealth tax with capital gains tax, which, fair. But the general concept there is that if you buy things with your cash, or you're giving these things as a compensation package, that you shouldn't be taxed on it when other people only can get cash as their compensation. And so if you can get other assets that you can then leverage to get more money, via debts or leveraging it in that kind of way, or you can trade it off to you can trade your stocks to or give it away as charity and use your appreciated value as a tax write-off to avoid paying taxes. Like those are compensation benefits. They are
Gotcha.
not cash, but they have cash value in the whole scheme of things. So it's like, again, like he is technically and definitionally correct in everything that he's saying right here. But if his argument is the tax system needs to change, I'm on board. If his argument is you should only ever be taxed on the cash in hand, I think that is it's 100% system that is gameable by people who have resources to be able to game it so they don't have to contribute to the overall society.
So instead of taxing unrealized gains in this circumstance, what if you said that anytime a company gave anything like stocks as compensation, that would be a taxable event, and so it would be the tax at the value that it is at the time of that transaction. Would that satisfy? Would that work?
It would be. I don't even know if that would work. In the whole scheme of things. So the way around that, I mean, not to jump way into like the quote unquote not loopholes, is trying to think of there's a specific term that people use for it. I don't know if I wrote it down in the notes, but it's essentially the concept is you get assets, you get debt for those assets, and then you die before you pay off the debt.
Yeah.
And if you die before you pay off the debt, you aren't taxed when the bank gets their money back.
Yeah.
So they will sell off some of your assets, but then it doesn't get taxed. So you essentially get to just put off paying any kind of gains until you're dead.
Yep.
And so then that money doesn't get taxed when it's redistributed back out. It just is able to be bought by somebody else. And then somebody else who had a bunch of money that could leverage that to get another loan to buy all of your assets now that you're dead. And then there's no taxes on it until after they die, unless they sell it. Or they can also put it in trusts or use that, and they can give that asset away without actually being taxed on it. So you're still able to accumulate all of this wealth, all of the stocks, all of essentially the money-making apparatuses in the country, but you never have to pay back into the system. Yeah. So I don't know the perfect solution, but any of the solutions that I've heard aren't even really hitting people until they're over like $100 million in assets. So, like, I mean, if they're trying to tax wealth, so they're not trying to make it so, oh, you have to be dirt fucking poor and you can't own anything. They're just trying to not let individuals get to the point where they can spiral or like just roll up assets and just keep getting debt on it over and over again to avoid any kind of taxation on it. Because when you like, so here's something that might be an option. When people take out loans on assets or like with asset leverage, maybe make that taxable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So instead of you getting a 1 to 3%, like if you're taking on $100 million loans on $10 million or $10 billion in assets, you're going to get like a 1% fucking loan. And if you're getting a 1% loan, tax it at that point, and then make that taxation be upwards to the equivalent of something close to, if not income. So like if you're getting $100 million loan taken out, you're only paying 1% back to the bank for facilitating the loan, but maybe you get taxed the other 23 to 34% on that loan as tax. Then
the downside, I see the downside to that is the stifling that could be for growing business. So I'm not talking about, multimillionaires. Well, let's say a small business that's looking to expand. They paid off their property, and they're then wanting to use that property, use the equity that they built up and what they've built to expand and open up another location. The cost that level of taxation in that one transaction would cost would be a very limiting factor on economic growth.
Yeah. I mean, it might, but in that case, then people wouldn't be able to hoard as much money too, or hoard as much wealth. So it's like it would potentially limit a little bit of an individual being able to own a ton of companies.
Mm-hmm.
But does one person owning a ton of companies really increase competition?
No, and generally speaking, I'm pro competition. In fact, later on in the show, I'm going to talk about my proposal, which would include not allowing companies to get as big as we have let them.
Yeah.
But
Which, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off
I
there.
know that's fine. I'm always hesitant to implement something that would be stifling to economic growth, because that's exactly the opposite of what we need to be focusing on. But I do get your point.
Economic growth for who? Because if there's appropriate taxes back in the system, there could easily be more grant monies for new startups. Like,
Yeah,
so
I don't.
So the
I don't.
whole system would be able to adjust if they had appropriate funds.
Mhm.
So
This
I
goes
mean,
back
like,
to
it's all interconnected. Taxes and policy go hand in hand. So it's
Yeah.
not just like if anyone is ever talking to you about taxes just theft, then they don't understand what's happening. Because
This goes back to my libertarian roots, where the idea of giving the government money to redistribute to encourage economic growth, rather than having that money in the actual economy, in the hands of people trying to create more jobs, create more business, create more cash flow, seems counterintuitive to my instincts. Yeah, I don't like using government as the tool to create more business. I like getting the government out of the way.
which is fair. I mean, however, all of the governments that are more in the way seem to be the ones that have the most technological advancements and the highest quality of life. To an extent, there's a certain centralized like planning structure, but I mean, like within a capitalist system,
Yeah.
I mean, not to bring this up this early, but I mean, like, where are the richest states with the most profitable businesses? They're not
Yeah.
in the most libertarian states.
Yeah. There's a question of cause and effect there.
Yeah, and just like I mean, even like the video that Tom, what's his? I don't remember.
Bilyeu, Tom
Yeah,
Bilyeu.
Tom Bilyeu and Pakman in that
Yep.
video that you showed
Impact
me,
theory.
which
Yep.
is totally a worthwhile video for anybody who's watching this out. Check that out too.
Yeah. We'll share the link.
Yeah, and I'll say they talked about a similar thing in Europe where they tried to make some kind of comparison about how much the United States has innovation versus Europe, but they grouped all of the different tax policies, fiscal policies, financial policies of Europe as if they were one conglomerate, similar to like they also kind of did that with the US, but the US is much closer to a similar conglomerate of rules.
Mhm.
But each state does have its own tax burdens and does have its own quality of life and has its own resources and things like that that they get to leverage. And it tends to be that like 9 out of the top 13, I think, 9 out of the top like 11 of the most profitable, most GDP independent, and like highest GDP states are all blue.
Yeah.
And so
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but I mean, again, it's not just less taxes is better. It's not just more taxes is better. It's what do those taxes accomplish? And I do agree, a lot of things, government just adds too much bureaucracy because if you can't have all of the accountability that everyone is happy to see everything that's happening and be able to like have the specific laws that everything has to be done exactly how it has to be, and then have the people there to enforce it and regulate it. If you're doing that for everything, it is not going to work. But there are certain things that is clearly beneficial, like public roads, public transit are two things that seem to be pretty good. Police seem to be pretty good. Firemen seem to be pretty good. I'm not saying everything, but potentially say like like some kind of taxation that would help say get like a pool of money for everybody when they turn 18 or something like that. Like, so if some of the taxes that were surplus into situations that we didn't like, or, you know, like that we currently don't all universally like, if that was all put into a giant like investment stock portfolio, and every time somebody turned 18, they got a certain, like the same amount across everybody, and they had that as an opportunity to start their own businesses or use that to further their education or something like that, that would most likely be a net benefit for our GDP as a whole.
For sure. Yeah. No,
and so
I love. Go ahead. Finish. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, but I mean that, like, so it's not just taxes, and that's the trick. I don't necessarily know what the best system would be, but when people are just like, don't tax, it stifles innovation. It's not that simple.
Yeah, it's
some
more nuanced.
Taxes. Yeah, and also when you understand that tax is also a leverage or a lever to stop the over consolidation of wealth into fewer and fewer hands.
Yep.
If you're allowing monopolies to form by the natural consolidation of wealth, because as you get wealth, it is easier to get more wealth within our system, then there is a certain amount of wealth that is attainable. Like there's only so much. Yeah. And so by that I mean the access to natural resources, the access to land, the access to labor. Because if you have all of the wealth and you can leverage that to get all of the best brain power and all of the best resources and all of the best land, what else is there that other people can actually get to compete with? Yeah. And so there needs to be some kind of counterbalancing system. So I start to get cringy when people are just like, I don't want you to tax me. I don't think we should necessarily tax income under a certain level.
Yep.
Because that makes it so people like us can't accumulate enough wealth to be able to start our own businesses. However, if everyone could start their own business, no one would be able to work together as a group. So it's like there's this weird balance of how do we make that balance, and do we want just like a few people to consolidate everything? If it was very beneficial for the entire population, I'd consider it. But it's been proven to not be working as we currently
centralization.
Are doing.
Yeah, centralization of power and money is always dangerous.
Yeah, if it's in the government, or if it's in like corporations, or if it's in groups of people that are at the top of corporations, because in our current structure, if you look at all like the Fortune 500 companies, they're all invested in each other.
Yep.
So it's is that okay? Like, should you be able to be investing in like multiple different companies? I was like, but yeah, again, it's like if everybody owned everything, nobody'd be a worker. And so we wouldn't be able to get anything done. So it's like there's a stratification that our system makes the way that it is. And I don't think the balance is right. And I just don't think just saying less taxes is going to help people, because that's not necessarily true. Just like I don't think more taxes is going to help us, because I don't think that's necessarily true. It all depends on how we're actually using taxes and how we're actually using our social programs.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry for that ramble, but
yeah, I would like to go back. Go ahead.
Yeah, but back to what Tim Pool was saying specifically there. Everything he is saying is definitionally true, but I feel like it's just totally sidestepping the actual heart of this conversation.
Yeah. So one thing I'd like to go back and address real quick is you had mentioned something to the effect of most of the really successful countries monetarily are generally more blue, more, taxing. And I would counter that we don't necessarily understand the cause and effect there. It could be that success tends to spawn more of a left-leaning, more heavily taxed kind of culture and mindset. So I would be less confident about what cause and effect is there as far as what creates that prosperity. But I think you're right that it does take a balance of taxation and appropriate use of those taxes to create an environment where cultures can thrive, where businesses can thrive. So yeah, generally I agree.
Yeah, and by the way, I wouldn't say that blue policies are what make innovation. Nothing like that. But I'm just saying, like, when you make the argument that lower taxes and a more like conservative liberal, like, or conservative fiscal policy or conservative taxation policy is like the way to go, there is strong evidence that that is not a very strong correlation. I'm not saying that, again, I'm not saying that it couldn't work in certain circumstances, but the evidence currently doesn't lean in a way that makes that argument able to be as simple as it seems like Tim was kind of implying.
Mhm.
Well, I guess not that Tim was trying to imply, because actually, so far he hasn't just blatantly pissed me off yet. He often does, but he's definitionally correct. But again, I do think he's sidestepping the substance of what could be a good conversation by definitionally arguing a more complicated point. Like, yeah. Like if you're hyper fixating on what is the definition of loophole here, you're totally just dodging the conversation.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to review this video, because generally speaking, I liked him. I think I think his contribution to the conversation is really solid. This is one instance where I got really frustrated because he was unwilling to have the nuanced conversation to really dig into the issue and talk about solutions, because he's got in his head, this is the narrative, this is the solution, and you're an idiot for thinking something that might be more left-leaning. Go ahead.
And his communication style is to steamroll you with definition if you don't seem like you're if you are not hyper educated on something. He tries to steamroll you with question or definition, and that's one of the things that I don't like, because it's a way to shut down intellectual, like, honest debate and conversation for a win. And I mean, don't get me wrong, he has a platform for a reason, and it's because he entertains people that believe certain things that he is trying to say, and he helps reinforce it, which is a way to sell a product. So I'm not dogging on him for that, but if you're trying to have an honest, like, betterment conversation, it's not a great strategy.
And he does have some excellent points that he makes, and so and that's what frustrates me, is because I think he would be good at having the real debate and real conversation, but instead of doing that, he's shutting down the conversation. But we'll continue to listen and see where it goes.
Government to violate his contract and sell stock so that he could cover the wealth tax they put on it, the company would enter free fall. Everyone would dump the stock overnight. It would become worthless. And then paradoxically, Jeff Bezos' net worth would be $100 million. And then he wouldn't owe those taxes in the first place.
The issue at hand here is that there's clearly an issue with how we're taxing people like this. If you think Jeff Bezos should only owe money on his $83,000 of income while he was working there, and not anything on any of the hundreds of millions of dollars that he had in stock and net worth, there's a serious issue there, because there are people who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars who are, again, paying more than Jeff Bezos was at the time.
I gotta stop
and if you don't think there's any issue with somebody like that paying significantly less than, again, like people like millionaires, people making millions.
I'm going to mute you if you just keep ranting and saying wrong things over and over again. He did not make cash. There's no income.
I said his net worth.
His net worth is paper that exists in a nebulous concept in the mind. Do you know what paper value means?
How much is Jeff Bezos worth?
I think it's $170 billion.
Okay, and when he was CEO of Amazon, what does net worth mean?
What does net worth mean?
It means your culmination of your assets.
Okay, and where does the value of those assets come from?
The demand for them.
And what happens if the government says we are seizing your stock?
The stock value will go down.
And then what does he owe? Nothing?
He'll owe some. The issue is that he should be paying more. The amount
more. What? He has no cash.
Okay,
Bro.
I think he's purposefully setting up his assets in such a way that this will be the net result. And this is what people are talking about when people like Raymond were saying the loophole.
If he
this is
sells
the
the
loophole.
stock,
the loophole is the
If he
laws
sells
that
the stock, he has to pay on the gain, on the realized gain of all of the cash he brings in.
Sure, but Tim, you understand
So
that he's
when
purposefully
he
taking a
realizes
low.
the
He was
income-
taking a low income on purpose. He was taking a low salary on purpose to be able to affect this loophole, and that is the issue at hand. No, he purposefully set it up this way so he would
fundamentally misunderstand how any of the corporate structure works in this country. Let's try this. Let's slow down. What is a C corp?
There's like a C corp and an S corp. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I don't know the exact.
You don't know why they
differentiate.
exist. Okay, first,
one's for an individual, I believe, and one's for a
no,
group. But
no.
you could go ahead.
Right. So the issue here is, if you don't understand something as basic as like they have B corps now, LLCs, an S corp technically is an LLC, a C corp is as well. There's special classifications.
This is that shitty posturing that I mentioned that I don't like that he does, because this is unnecessary to having this conversation.
Absolutely. But I do want to give both Alad and Tim some credit here. First, Tim Pool does have people on his staff that think differently, and he doesn't, he does tolerate having people around him who think differently, as intolerant as he is being at the moment. And I appreciate that Alad has the courage to continue to stand on his position, even though he's being berated for it.
And he's not even making the best arguments, which is what is allowing Tim to do this. I mean, don't get me wrong. When you're put on the spot, when you're put on the spot like this, it's kind of rough. I would do a whole lot better, but I think I might do a little better than what Alad's doing. But if I wasn't prepared for it, Tim seems very much like he was prepared to have this conversation. And he looked up these definitions on Google or like in the dictionary before he came here, so he could. I mean, he might have known him before, but I mean, he's having a definitional debate on a non-definitional concept, and he's using that leverage of knowledge of definition to sidestep what is actually being talked about. And Alad, or what is it, Alad?
Yes.
And Alad is actually trying to address the point from a substantial systems point of view, but he's talking about it in a more nebulous way because he's talking about it conceptually and Tim Pool's taking advantage of the definitional knowledge he has of it. And he's trying to make Alad look stupid, even though Alad's points are actually still correct.
Yeah.
Tim's points are also correct. They're just less related to what he's actually trying to have the conversation about.
Yep. Agreed.
What those mean? I mean, that's 101. Okay. So if you look to a CEO who's running a company and then you go, he should pay money on money he doesn't have, is what you're saying, because the company he runs is worth a lot of money. We have a problem here where logic has failed. My point is, let's start with, you don't even know what a C Corp is, so let's not play the game of you think Jeff Bezos intentionally took an action to obfuscate his wealth and avoid paying taxes.
You don't think that's what he's doing here?
No.
That he did? Okay.
That is applying malintent to a man who is probably just abiding by tax law as he's instructed by his lawyer.
In order to achieve what? The loophole.
It's not a loophole when you are doing what the law tells you have to do.
Well, I think it's a distinction without a difference. They set up the law in such a way to act as a
I do have an interjection point here.
Yeah.
Which is, who lobbied for these laws to be the way that they are, and who lobbied and worked on getting these tax codes in place?
The corporations, the businesses, the rich. Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, he's following the law that was designed for him to be able to do this shit.
Yep.
So people wouldn't lose their wealth I mean, I'm not saying that it's intentionally to like. It doesn't have to be malintent. Like,
Yep.
so when he's saying that, he's like, you're blaming. You're saying that it's his evil nature. No, it's him taking advantage of the system to keep his wealth as much as he can, because our system is not designed to distribute, like to pull this wealth back out of the system when it's being hoarded.
Yep.
And so, like, yeah, again, like they're both technically correct. I mean, well, again, Tim keeps being definitionally correct, and Alad keeps bringing up the actual important points, and then Tim keeps shitting on him.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try not to get like, I'm going to try not to interject again, but like that was just another prime example. It's like you're dodging the point intentionally, or Tim doesn't understand that point because he hasn't brought up anything about who's lobbying to make these laws the way they are. Yeah, we have an overcomplicated tax system. You know who benefits from that? People who can get tax lawyers. You know who gets tax lawyers? Really fucking rich people.
Yep. Yeah, my impression is Tim knows that he, at least on a subconscious level, knows that he's avoiding the actual discussion, but he seems to be so passionate about his view that he's just steamrolling rather than having the conversation.
Yeah, I would be willing to accept that as a reason. It does kind of feel like that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to simmer.
You're good.
Whereas what's actually happening is he called his lawyer and said, how am I supposed to do this? And they said, based on U.S. tax code 531C, you have to do this, you have to file this, and you have to pay yourself this. When I first started this company, my accountant told me, here's the range at which you can pay yourself. I said, okay, then I'll just choose a number. We have profits for this company. Profits tax at a lower margin than employment. So CEOs want to pay themselves less, but there's an expected market value. Here's another thing I don't think you understand. We cannot pay people above market rate. You can try to justify it. You're opening yourself up to an audit. I go to my accountant and I say, hey, we got this guy, he's a big talent. I want to pay him, $1 million. They say, what's his job? Oh, he's a musician. They'll say, do session musicians get paid $1 million? Not often. Okay, you're going to have to justify to the IRS when they audit you why you're paying someone so high above market. You shouldn't do that. I say, oh. See, because the tax code works like this, okay? It's not a loophole when the government passes a law that makes you do these things. The loophole is a term used by activists to go after people who are wealthy and claim they're doing something maliciously when they're doing what they're contractually obligated to do or what the government requires them to do. If the law exists and is solidified, and then a company forms, and they say, how do we create a pay structure for the person who runs this company? Well, based on the law, we have to do these 10 things. Okay. And then you come out and go, aha, he's cheating by using a loophole. And he's like, what do you mean? The law was there before we started the company, and my lawyers told me that's how I had to do it.
I think there's an issue with the way our laws in this country are set up to tax, in particular, the ultra wealthy, the top 100, which are in a different scenario than even the top 10,000 people. So there's an issue.
So you're more like a communist.
No.
Well, hold on. You think we should tax people on cash they don't have because there is an ascribed market value in the imagination?
I don't know the exact solution for how to tax people who are in the top 10 amount of wealth, but if you look at the amount they pay compared to the amount that the top 10,000 earners are, the top 10 have worked.
You are wrong. It is substantially higher.
What you're talking about, what you're talking about would mean that people that are pensioners that are on fixed income.
I'm talking about top 10ers.
Stop talking over people. Let me finish. Because what you're talking about is talking about taxing unrealized gains.
I don't know how else to explicitly say. I'm talking about the top earners and top net worth individuals in our society.
Elad, the method.
That's who I'm talking about.
Elad, stay with me here. The method to do what you're...
Phil, you could have carve-outs. If we're talking about specific people, we could have the law set up in a way.
Pensioners aren't. Here's a Jeff Bezos law and an Elon Musk law, and you're an insane person.
Let's just rein it in. Elad votes.
What?
Well, I abstained because I try to have
thank God,
journalistic integrity. But if we do want to wrap it back around to this Doge story, I think it's interesting which stories of Doge cutting, what news stories of Doge cutting we choose to pay attention to, because on the left they'll focus on stories like, oh, in the middle of Africa they're cutting healthcare that saved tens of thousands of Africans, and then they talk about that, and they talk about how they're cutting different people, different parts.
Yes. I drew you a picture. Maybe the
zoom in
picture.
more.
Maybe the picture can help.
Vision.
This is a graph made by ChatGPT of total taxes paid by income bracket. Why? That's interesting. Total real taxes paid in billions by income bracket, and somehow the wealthiest individuals are paying the overwhelming majority of all taxes.
What percent?
All right, I'm going to jump in here. So I'm going to actually make more of the left argument in this point. So this is income. This is not net worth. That's a very important distinction. Yep. Because as Alad was trying to point out, someone's income can be very low while their net worth can be astronomical. And so this is not a proper representation. In fact, and for the listeners, I tried to go on Grok today and ask it to generate a chart like this as far as the percentage of the total tax revenue is contributed by the wealth of individuals, like the top 1%, the top 10% of wealth. But Grok came back and said, well, I can't give you that, but I can give you income. And so it generated a chart very similar to this, and which was frustrating. I wish I could have generated a chart that I could show you as based on net worth and what people's net worth versus what they're contributing to that tax total, because that would be a very interesting contrast to see.
Yeah. So one extra note on this. This is just something that popped into my head while they were berating him. So Jeff Bezos has an $83,000 salary or whatever they said for this.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos also has like a $120 million super yacht. None of us making $83,000 a year can get a super yacht that has to have a dedicated crew on it and be able to pay them with our income and our tax burden. There's no, if you're just ignoring the fact that paying yourself like that does not mean that that's all of the access to spending power that you have. You're putting your head in the sand, or you just are you're definitionally arguing a conceptual problem, and it's a bad faith way to make the to have this argument.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I say, and again, the things that they are saying are definitionally true. The laws are like this, but that is what a lot is trying to point out. They're like, oh, you're a communist. Oh, you want to fucking tax people's money that isn't real money.
Yeah.
If that not real money can get you a fucking super yacht and a 30-person crew that has to maintain that super yacht, and it doesn't affect the way that you live in any way, shape, or form, and you're still paying the same amount of taxes on your income as somebody who works and actually makes that $83,000 a year like we do.
Yeah.
And also Jeff Bezos can write off that super yacht onto his income.
Yep.
So that means he's not going to have to pay that taxes because he has to maintain that yacht for whatever fucking business ownership or whatever company he started that lets him have that yacht.
Yeah.
And so it's it's a different system.
Yeah.
It's our system. Yeah. But if you just ignore the fact that it doesn't work the same, then you're just having a bad faith argument.
Yeah, he checks his emails on that yacht, so it's a business expense.
Exactly. It's an office, so you can write off all the square footage.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sorry.
You're good.
Yeah, I do agree. Again, they're technically saying true words and true statements, but that that weird technicality is totally avoiding the actual problem.
Yeah.
I can't see the number. Is the wealthiest?
It's not percent. It's $1 million plus.
Okay, I'm talking about like the top net worth individuals, which are different than the top 1%.
That's included. What was Bezos's income per year? Was it 1 million?
No,
was it 1 million?
It was less, but his net worth was in the hundreds of millions.
Elad, it was $1 million.
Okay.
It was 1 million.
So if you look for a more specific graph,
what's 12 divided by 1? What's 1 million divided by 12?
You tell me.
Is it around $80,000?
Okay, Tim.
Jeff Bezos was intentionally paying himself $1 million, plus he was getting an additional $1 million in benefits. Okay. He was getting a $1 million bonus plus $1 million salary.
This isn't talking about like the specific details that I'm trying to explain to you guys about top net worth individuals that are getting bumped into the top 1%.
Everybody understands
so you could
that you want
but this graph
that are
is
specific to the individual. You just
must,
said that.
No, he did not say that.
Yeah, he said the top specific percent. Yep.
You muscle shirt man said that that's what he meant because it made you feel good. It's a dog. Alad's holding himself well considering this is just an obnoxious dog pile.
Yeah. Well, and it's because I forgot the guy's name. Muscle shirt guy.
Sorry, I don't mean
anyway. No, he's a cool guy, but he is projecting a specific. This is what human beings, we're designed to like put people in categories, and so when we get triggered and we hear a specific mindset or we hear a specific thing, we say, "Oh, you're in this category now," and so he's projecting this more communist worldview on him when that's not what he's trying to represent.
Advocating for a different tax structure doesn't mean that you're a communist. A communist is about who has access to the means of production.
Individuals who have completely unique situations.
You're not articulating yourself clearly.
Wait,
you're saying you just said unique situations. That means you want targeted taxes.
So Jeff,
let me finish so I can make sure that I understand. For specific people that make an amount of money that you deem as enough, you want specific tax law for individuals specifically because they make too much. That's unconstitutional.
That's what we do right now. Is we have
it's not unconstitutional.
Yeah, we have a progressive tax system that taxes people different amounts based on how much money they make. So that's what we do right now.
Yeah, this guy's just way off base on what he's saying right now.
Yeah.
Psychopath. That's unconstitutional.
Yeah. We have a progressive tax law already, and it's not
you want tax law aimed at people that will make people
No. We're gonna move on. Okay. We're gonna go to the next story. But I'm going to say this. Elad is simply just trying to say anything that gives him the correct position in the argument, even though nothing he said has even aligned with anything he said prior. Right? You just keep changing what you're saying.
No, you guys just...
That smirk. That was a bullshit smirk. He knew he was being a bullshitter.
Yeah.
You saw that before the thing panned away from Tim. It was like, that was the bad faith smirk right there.
Yeah. They do get into it again later in the program, but I think this is sufficient to really understand the argument that was being had. And yeah. So it's frustrating because generally speaking, I am more in agreement with Tim on this issue, but the fact that he was unwilling to have the nuanced conversation frustrates me to no end. And is one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is because people are, not everyone, but a lot of people, a lot of the prominent people like Tim, as much as I appreciate his work, are unwilling to have the nuanced conversations. And that's what we're trying to do here, is have an open, non-aggressive, nuanced conversation where we can express different views and we can have an open mind to different perspectives. So I don't know I guess we already covered it pretty well, but do you have any other thoughts on all of that?
I'll say, I think we did a pretty good job of hitting it when it was happening.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything that I really wanted to add to it, but, yeah, I mean, the trick is understanding what taxes are, what they're used for, and having a system that actually allocates social programs or social like I don't want to say like equality generation or like something like, but like, you know, equity help or something along that lines. If you actually have a system that allows for more people to have more opportunity to do more potential beneficial things for society, that doesn't mean that you are just, even when you're doing the things to help society, giving a bigger percentage of your help to somebody who already owns everything.
Mhm.
That's essentially what most social democrats and most like left-leaning people are actually asking for. Most of us are not trying to be like the government should run everything. It's mostly the fact that we're pointing out that the way that this system is operating was written by and for the people who already have almost everything.
Yeah.
And so it's a like both sides of this argument want more good things for more people, but the people who are actually controlling this type of stuff want more for them.
Well, and I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, that's fair. But
Yeah.
they don't want to give up what they've earned or what they perceivably think is their earnage, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. But
Yeah.
I'm of
The
the
human. Go ahead.
I'm of the perspective that if you drop a billionaire on an island by himself, he's not going to become a billionaire again.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
you need the people who want to buy the things, you need the people who are interacting with the society, you need the people who are working in the society to buy the things and use the things that you're generating as well. So just providing it and just building that thing to give to society in a void means nothing. You actually have to have a useful society and a functional society to be able to leverage that good stuff. So it's like it's do you value the objects and or the creations, or do you value the human aspect of life and the humans that are also interacting with the things that you're generating? And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it has to be all one way or the other. There's a balance in that spectrum that we need to contend with, and just taxes are theft is just a thought canceling cliche, just like eat the rich is a potentially thought canceling cliche. But if you go too far either direction, it gets a little bit weird.
Yeah. I think that considering that taxation is theft is a good thing to provoke some thoughts, but it also can be shutting down the larger conversation. So it's a little bit of both. But I would also argue that both the right and the left, you had kind of mentioned this, but the right and the left are generally speaking working towards the same goal. Generally speaking, there's some differences for sure.
The economic left and the economic right. If you start adding the social sides into it,
that's
it's
a little
bit more muddled.
Yeah, for sure. So perfect. Yeah, perfect. So the economic left, economic right, generally speaking, want the same outcome. It's just a different disagreement on the method to get there.
Yeah, I'd say for the most part, I think there's a slightly more hierarchical thinking on the right and slightly more socialistic or more communal thinking on the left. And if you add that into the economic structures, it still angles you toward a similar goal, but it does it does change things out a little bit more. So it's like they're much closer than we talk about them on average, but there are some differences. But yeah, I'd say 80% in the right direction.
All right, because we got through that topic so quickly, we're going to watch a second video and kind of react to it. This one is titled Debunking the Tax the Rich Lie by Learn Library, a YouTube channel. And we'll have the link below.
So we always hear that the rich should pay taxes more, that our tax rates aren't high enough. If only we raise taxes, we could solve a lot of our problems. Inequality would go down, and maybe we'd even have more economic growth. Now, the funny thing about this view is that it really doesn't comport with our historical experience at all. Whenever we have raised taxes on the rich, we have seen horrible offenses against inequality and economic growth. The most illustrative of these eras was the 1950s, when the top income tax rate in the United States went all the way up to 91%. Now, I want to point out that that is no misprint. The top tax rate in the United States was 100% minus 9%, 91%. If you made $200,000 or more, your last income was subject to 91% confiscation by the United States government. There were also 26 brackets in the income tax code, and they ran from 20% all the way up to 90%. If you made any kind of money at all, you were paying 30, 40, 50%. If you started making more money, 60, 70, 80, 90%. That was a high tax era. Now you may be thinking, but wait a minute, the 1950s, they were the greatest economic era ever. That's when everybody had a job. Those jobs were for life. People got to live in suburbia and go on vacation and do all sorts of amazing things. It was post-war prosperity, right? Actually, all of these things are myths. In the 1950s, the United States suffered 4 recessions. There was one in 1949, 1953, 1957, 1960, 4 recessions in 11 years. The rate of structural unemployment kept going up, all the way up to 8% in the severe recession of 1957-58. So there wasn't significant economic growth in the 1950s. It only averaged 2.5% during the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower. And the tax code spawned inequality that is even unheard of today. How so? Well, when you have a marginal rate of the income tax that is 91%, to have an exception from that income tax is very valuable. If you were able to get a statute written into the tax code that says you don't have to pay that 91% and you're high income, you can either pay nothing or pay a much lower rate, that exemption is very valuable. The tax code in the 1950s was 11,000 pages. The first 2 pages of the tax code said very simple things. The opening line of the tax code said that income is taxable from any and all sources derived. Okay, if you make income, it's taxable. And then the second 2 pages of the tax code were the list of the rates that started at 20% on low income and went all the way up to 90%, 91% on high income. The next 11,000 pages after those first 2 pages were exceptions to those statements. They were pet statutes that were written into law by Congress at the behest of lobbyists that said this income is not subject to taxation. In almost every case, it had to do with the income of the rich. Let's give some examples. One of the most notorious cases, perfectly legal by the way, was that of the movie studio mogul Louis B. Mayer. In 1951, Louis B. Mayer retired from his studio in Hollywood, and he got a lump sum payment from the studio of $2.7 million, which is probably about $20 million today. And that income was not subject to the 91% tax rate. It was only subject to a 25% tax rate. How did that happen? Louis B. Mayer hired a lobbyist who got a congressman to write a pet statute into the law that exempted his income from taxation. And it applied only to Mayer and his associate who got those lump sum payments. That's what the 11,000 pages in the tax code were. They were a nest of cronyism. And the only way that those exemptions would ever be thought to be put in the tax code is if the marginal tax rate were high. The marginal tax rate was high, therefore all sorts of people wanted exemptions from it. There was a famous comment among the legal bar in the 1950s that was recorded by John F. Kennedy's SEC chairman, William Carey. And that comment was, once you become a millionaire, you don't try to litigate a tax case. You don't try to contest the IRS if you say they think you owe more money than you do. You simply get the statute changed. That's how easy it was in the 1950s to get Congress to write a pet exemption for you in the tax code.
So I'm going to stop it there, and I want to say thank you to this guy for producing this video. I encourage you guys to watch all the videos that we've referenced today. In fact, there's a couple extra that I'm going to be adding that I think add great points to this conversation. You can agree or disagree, that's fine. It's a great way to explore these topics and try to understand them on a deeper level, and some of the history, some of the consequences, some of the unintended consequences. But Kris, what did you think of this one?
Oversimplified way to throw a very specific narrative, but his point is a good one.
Okay.
So when I say that, I mean the rich. I mean, I've heard that trope too, which is like essentially if you make over $1 million, you don't argue about how much you owe, you get the law changed. I don't think that would be based on the premise that he said in the beginning, which is the rich people like high taxes. I don't think that means they like it. I think that means that they have the means to avoid it. So they're not paying those high taxes, so they don't care. But again, our system has unfortunately for a long time been built to benefit the ultra wealthy, which is what most people who are saying, like, tax the rich, eat the rich, whatever kind of variation of the angry people who want some version of wealth equity or wealth redistribution or whatever terminology you want to throw on it. That's usually what they're trying to argue, is that this type of stuff happens because the wealthy keep changing the rules for the wealthy, or the wealthy / powerful, depending on how you want to argue that. And so I agree, but again, it's like, if our system sucks, we need to change our freaking system. It's just taxing more and just taxing less isn't the end all be all of the argument. Just kind of like the when people were talking about like reforming school and reforming stuff like that, there's a little bit more to it than just being like, well, cut all the funding or fund the schools more. It's, if we don't have a proper system and an actual identifiable goal that we're actually leaning toward, and we don't let people get away, or what's a good way? If we let people get away with manipulating the system because we don't have an informed electorate that actually understands what's happening, how it's happening, and we just like let the people who like cozied their way into power just be affected by the things in power because they can make more for themselves than they can helping the rest of the people, then we need to work on the system.
Yeah.
And so I do think that our system is broken, but I don't think that I would have to watch more of this guy's stuff to understand his like ethos and thought process on it, because it felt a little awkward and smug to me in this, which makes me think like he's mocking the left a little bit in his attempt to present this point, which, I mean, again, go for it if that's what you think is going to get your views. But it's I don't know if that's a productive way to do it, because he's like, oh yeah, the rich are just going to change the law. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, for sure. Another argument that could be made and has been made as far as trying to make an environment that is beneficial for the wealthy is that if you increase taxes too much, if you don't give enough incentive for the wealthy to live here and to produce here, that they'll travel somewhere else, or they'll put their money across the ocean, or they'll find tax havens, and they'll send labor to China. Whatever we create here that would make it so the rich aren't as profitable and successful here means that we'll just take all that economic value and shift it somewhere else.
There is an argument for that. I mean, there's ways to avoid that, but I mean, again, it's the simple solution is give up and let them do what they want. And I don't think that's the best solution. I don't know what the best solution is, but just giving up and letting people loot, like individuals loot all of the wealth in our group, or like all of the wealth in our collective society, just because they got to it first, isn't a good system. So, like, yeah, they might run away, but in the past, like our current system of how easy it is to transfer wealth because wealth is just, you know, in a spreadsheet somewhere. It's a little bit harder to stop people from like running away from like their current areas and like the current like businesses and stuff like that they have started here because like within the last like 20 years or so a majority of the wealth generation that's happened has been like online digital type stuff that can be done from anywhere in the world. However, there's also a relatively easy way to kind of push back on that as a collective, as a, like, you know, a government or a country, which is if you want access to our market, you have to kind of play by our rules. Mm-hmm. So if you up and try to take all of your stuff to another place, you may not have access to our market. And if you're in another country, it's a lot easier to steal your intellectual property. Like China steals our intellectual property and our ability to like manufacture and like when I say steal, I mean figure out how we do it and then reverse engineer it and then do it as well. So it turns into a who has access to the most rare materials and the most like profitable land masses. And so yeah, I'll say there's different ways to leverage that type of power and like taxation and avoidance of taxation, or like again, if you think of it as taxation is like I'm taking the things you earn away, I think you're missing a large part of the picture, which is this is part of what the contribution that you give to the society for being able to be a part of this society. Mm-hmm. And so I understand I don't like to lose what I've made, but you also didn't make it by yourself. And so it's like there's a give and take there, and I don't think it needs to be all one way or the other. I think the tax structure needs to be simplified more, and it needs to be more evened out. But we also need to redefine what income is. If you can pay people in assets that they can leverage for debt that's untaxable.
Agreed.
Because again, I don't think that most of these millionaires and billionaires are trying to avoid taxes. They're just trying to get as much for themselves within the system that we have.
Yep.
So if that's what your goal is, and that ends up being I avoid taxes, I think we need to readjust the system because, again, they're a part of the system. They're not just this wild free radical that is outside of the system. And if we cut out so many holes that they get to be that and pretend that they're being paid the same amount that we are, then that's a broken system. So we really need to readdress the tax structure and our definitions of what wealth and what is taxable and what should be able to be allowed as compensation.
Yep.
Or this is going to continue to be a problem, which is why it's written into the tax codes the way it is right now, because people wanted this type of system. Yep. Well, when I say people, I don't mean the majority. I mean the people who had the influence over the people writing the laws, which is not the average person, which is not the working class. So it's usually the rich and the people who can control the narratives and have the ability to influence politicians and or get politicians that are willing to do the things that they would like into power. But with the internet age, we should, in theory, be able to educate more people and like help get this information out there. However, just as much as in theory we should be able to do it as like the lowly us's that we are, it's a lot easier for the people who have the money, the assets, and the infrastructure to do it as well, as noted by like Elon Musk buying an entire public town square and turning it private, and then it turning into like one of the biggest right-wing like news propaganda pieces in the world, being Twitter or X. And so it's like he bought a whole propaganda machine that was already built, and then he took it private, so there was no ability to actually look into what was going on there, changed the algorithm so he was the number one person that got promoted out to everybody else, then started saying a bunch of shit he wanted to say, and started allowing bots and unregistered accounts to be able to post things, and he could promote whatever he wanted to, and then people started to buy into it. The newer, like the addition of the this is me tangenting, sorry, but the addition of the the community review is good, but it often happens too late. Most people already get the bad information. It gets soaked into their head. They get their confirmation bias, and they get their like happy drugs in their brain before they ever have a chance to see that it was like somebody corrected it.
Yeah, and I've gotten notifications that material that I've already seen or clicked on has had a community note added to it, so it's let me go back and see what that community note is.
Is that like something that you think most people are going to go back and do?
No, people who are interested in knowing, truth versus what they want to hear are, but that's not, I don't know what percentage of people that is.
That's fair. Yeah, so I don't know either. But again, from what I've heard about the community guideline or the
Community notes,
the community notes, I do think that is at least a decent step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But that got added after essentially half of the thinking world was chased away from that platform.
Mm-hmm. So I want to go back to a couple of these points because I don't know that we actually outlined what some of these loopholes are, and you actually turned me on to this issue, and I didn't know that this was a thing. But many of these millionaires, billionaires can take out loans against their assets, their loans against their stock, and they live. They can buy yachts. They can live off of that money. And that's not taxable. That loan is not taxable. So they're essentially living tax-free off of that income. Now they do pay interest to the bank, but that's nowhere near what the tax would be, and that interest is going to the bank, not to the government. So that is a very clear way of avoiding paying taxes on the money that you're living on.
Yeah, and in addition, once you hit a certain dollar amount or a certain asset value, it is pretty easy to get enough money to generate or to get more, like to invest more with what you have borrowed into more stocks and more assets that will offset that 1% to 3% that you're actually paying back. So if you only need 10 million to live your wild lifestyle, you get $100 million loan and you reinvest 90 million of it, and you're still gaining, a portion of the wealth generation of the country. And so it's at a certain value amount and a certain wealth amount, you essentially hit like escape velocity.
Yeah. So make the argument for our viewers for the concept of taxing unrealized gains. And for those who don't know, unrealized gains means the stocks that you have, the value, when those stocks go up in value, that adds to your net worth, but you're not taxed on those until you sell those stocks. When you sell the stocks, then you have capital gains. But what many have been advocating for is taxing those unrealized gains. So taxing stocks that you haven't sold that have gone up in value. What's the argument in favor of that?
Well, the argument in favor of that is that there would be more tax money going back into the system. But I'm not 100% convinced that I agree with that strategy. We had like a loose conversation earlier about how I think a better system would be to have some kind of actual tax applied to loans that are leveraging assets.
Yep. I agree that would be a better mechanism.
Yeah, because if you it is true, if you're taxing something that doesn't have an inherent dollar value, then that is essentially just if you own part of something, the government is taking part of that something. But if you're able to get that as part of your compensation package, I don't know if I have that big of an issue with somebody being able to tax that back out, because I get dollars as my compensation package, and the government can take that. So I don't understand why the government wouldn't be able to get stock, like be able to take stock if that's part of your compensation package. I think it would, if they were to do that, I think they would stop allowing people to take stock as part of their compensation package, which might be a good thing. Because the way that we're currently doing it definitely allows for the accumulation of untaxable and wealth that doesn't make you have to contribute back into the system that let you get that wealth. And so I think that there's there's a way to go about something similar to that, but I don't know if just like the unrealized gains is the way to go, because then you're essentially forcing people to either give up the stocks or take loans against those stocks and have a slightly higher risk value to pay taxes on a percentage of that unrealized gain. But again, like, we pay taxes based on a lot of things that are, are quote unquote ours. So, like, property taxes and other things. And if you can't pay your property taxes, you got to sell your house. So it's like, is it really that unfair in the whole scheme of things? I don't, like, comparatively unfair. I don't know, but I think there's a better system that doesn't, or like, I think doing something different, like if you're leveraging those assets for loans, then that should be taxed. I think that makes more sense to me, because that doesn't take away as much of the desire to incentivize, like, gaining wealth or starting companies and stuff like that. But it does, or investing into companies, but it does lean away a little bit more from the ease of consolidating wealth and wealth generation. Once you're at the level that you can do that system and not like have that much risk.
Yeah. The libertarian in me hates the idea of taxing things that you own, whether it be your house, your property, things like that. So I would like to get rid of all of the things that tax the things that you own. However, the flip side to that, I'm not blind to the problem where people accumulate so many assets that they can hoard that wealth, and then that wealth is not being circulated through the economy and being centralized. And I see that being an issue. So I see both sides of it.
Yeah. And like, I think not taxing up to a certain dollar amount for income and or property and or assets is probably the way to go. And then taxing above a certain like wealth level makes the most sense for a functional society. But the people that are making more are going to fight back so hard and like talk about how that's going to essentially cause less invention, less progress, less whatever. But it would most likely generate more competition, because there would be more people having access to more wealth to take more of the chances that they would want to take to be able to compete in the market. So it's like, as of right now, most people have to buy, like, if they want to do well in life, have to buy into an already established company and contribute to said company without competing against it. And if they do start to compete against it, many of these corporations and or very wealthy rich people can just buy them out, and like they can do buy and kills or just buy and incorporate it into their own wealth structure. So it's like, I don't know if that is the most competition and innovationally functional structure, but I don't think just taking away people's ability to generate wealth so they can then leverage that wealth to do really cool and interesting things is the best strategy either, but there has to be some kind of balance if we care enough about like the vast majority of the people, which is like the middle class and lower class. There has to be some give and take there. But I just don't know exactly how much. But the way that we have it right now is you can hit escape velocity, and we're getting more people that are doing it, and I don't know if having a bunch of billionaires owning, like what is it, like 11 to 50 people own 50% of the wealth generating potential in the U.S. We have 300 million people, or 350 million people, 380 million people, something like that. Maybe even higher. I don't know. I haven't looked in a while. But when 40 people have the ability to control all of the wealth generation for half of the country, the system is lopsided in a way that is like unmanageable, especially if they know how to avoid all of their taxation out of the way to contribute back to the society.
So there's another video that I'd like to reference here. It's by the YouTube channel, The Diary of a CEO. And this video is really great, a really great debate. The emergency debate, they lied about the economy recovering, is a financial apocalypse coming. Is outstanding video. I think I sent this one to you as well, Kris.
Yep.
And I loved this debate because it was two relatively intelligent people, and they were trying to have a really respectful, coherent conversation. And one of the points that was trying to be made by one of the individuals, and I'll link the video down below, and I highly recommend watching this. One of the points
emotional. There's
yeah,
a little bit of emotional vibes into it.
well, for sure. I mean, it's hard to talk about some of these subjects when you're so emotionally invested in it, and it really affects people's lives, and not get emotional about it.
Oh yeah.
But one of the points being made was a lot of people in the EU, because of the EU's new policies about trying to tax the rich, a lot of the companies are shutting down, moving out. A lot of the people who would create jobs are moving out of the country. And a lot of the innovation that they otherwise might have is arguably being stifled by their policies. And so we can see there's a balancing act here, and they might be a little bit out of balance in the overregulating and the overtaxing of the rich. So what's your thoughts on that? And do we need to tax the rich more?
So again, like that does get a little complicated. We need to find a way to make it so more people can generate wealth and the wealth disparity isn't as high. I don't inherently have a problem against the rich, but the consolidation of wealth in few hands is a major problem. And the only real mechanism that we currently know how to use as a society seems to be taxing. And so it seems like some amount of taxing the rich pretty much has to happen, or there's going to be guillotines. Like that seems to be the trend throughout history. And I don't see it changing. People.
And see, that's really interesting because, yeah, go ahead, finish.
I mean, just because people want, when things get super bad and they can't keep up with the Joneses, they eventually just take what the Joneses have.
Yeah. So, and it's really interesting because I was coming up with the same conclusion-ish. My conclusion was, all right, we need some mechanism of encouraging the ultra wealthy to reinvest in job creation, to reinvest in innovation, to get that money circulated back into the economy. And you're saying that taxation is the only real tool that we know of to do that. I would like to think that there's another way of doing it, another tool out there that we can set up our economy in such a way that the ultra wealthy are incentivized to choose, because one of the reasons why people get wealthy is because they're very, very good at allocating capital. And so probably a lot better at it than the government would be with tax dollars.
Or extracting.
Either or. But if you can incentivize those same people who are really good at allocating capital to allocate that into job creation, into innovation, if that's a mechanism you have and it happens in a free market tool rather than a government driven tool, that's what I would like to see. And I'm not smart enough to come up with the equation to make that work. And I recognize that taxation does play a role in that. In fact, you could use taxation as a tool to say, hey, if you don't spend that money on investing in business, investing in jobs, investing in innovation, it's going to be taxed and you're going to lose it. So I'm not blind to using taxes as a tool, but I want it to be a more natural open market version of redistribution of wealth rather than a tax government redistribution of wealth.
Well, I mean, whatever you name it needs to happen. But the only real successful strategies that I've seen in the past have been like higher tax rates on those who have more. So corporate tax rates being really high was a way that a lot more people started to hire a lot more people and expand their business. But one of the kickers there is businesses can only expand so much because there's only so much demand.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get to a certain point with our current system, with like the board member structure and like the fiduciary stock board, like the control of stocks and the fiduciary responsibilities of boards of these groups, because they're publicly traded companies, they have an obligation to grow, not an obligation to do good.
Mm-hmm.
And so they need to maximize profits, which there's only like 3 levers of generate, like when you're talking about generating new products and wealth, there's only like 3 levers that do it or like that are affecting it, which is the cost of making the widget, how much you sell the widget for, and the cost of labor. And so when I say the cost of making the widget, would be
material cost.
Yeah, material costs and things like that. And then the labor to make that widget, and then what you sell that widget for. Mm-hmm. And so you can only really have somebody affect how much you pay someone, what the cost of the materials are, or how much you charge for it.
Yeah.
And we're in a system where we have a bunch of the biggest companies having to grow when those are their only levers of opportunity. So it's gotten to the point now where the easiest way to manipulate that system is to lower the wages.
Yeah. So maybe if we revisited the laws surrounding fiduciary responsibility and made the drive, because that's one of my fears about companies that I've liked and not wanting them to go public, because I don't want them to lose their soul, because that seems to happen with every company that goes public. So yeah, I would be open to figuring out a way where it's not so heavily driven into profits.
Yeah, and I mean, welcome to the world of socialism. Like
that's one solution. Not
no,
necessarily
I mean what you're saying is like once you get out of the free market capitalistic structure, which the capital system essentially is encouraging the accumulation of capital as the primary source of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
When you start to not have capital or the ownership of something, it turns out to be more labor, and the more labor-oriented structures tend to be socialistic.
Well, and see, when I've had companies that I've really liked that were private, they were run by a private individual that had passion for the product, whatever that product was.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was owned by a single individual, not by the workers. And that's the format that I liked. But if again, centralization of power, if that gets too big, then that goes bad. and what happens when that person retires. There's a whole bunch of problems with that. But
oh yeah, the
So-
size of our megacorps makes things problematic. The way that we structure the fiduciary responsibility of boards to stocks and shareholders because we value capital over labor is problematic. I mean, we don't have to be socialistic or socialist to value labor at a higher rate than we currently do. But the entire like the premise of capitalism essentially indicates that your capital is more valuable than any particular other aspect of life. And capital being intellectual capital, your capital of like ownership capital, your labor capital, yada yada. Well, labor capital is a type of capital, but it seems to be devalued in the current system.
Yeah. So let's play a game of King for a Day. I'd like to propose what my ideal tax system would be if I were to just write the tax law myself. And then if you can poke some holes in it and respond to it and tell me what you think. And then after, if you want to share what your ideal tax system would look like. So my idea would be have a flat tax of say 15%. It could be it could be 10, could be 20, but I'm just going to say 15 because that makes sense to me. Flat tax for individuals, flat tax for corporate, all 15%. No income under 50K for individuals or 100K for households would be taxable. For businesses or corporations, a certain number of employees. So if you have under 3 employees or under 5 employees, whatever that target is, the first 50K is not taxable. If you have over that set number of employees, the first 100K is untaxable. The advantage to that being, of course, the people who are making less money on an individual basis would not be taxed, and so that would really help people like you and me as far as not getting squashed and being able to afford life and be able to save up, start businesses, so on. For businesses also, small businesses being able to not have that tax burden will be a huge benefit and would increase the number of small businesses, would increase ingenuity. It's just overall, I think, would be a benefit. And then tax law, I would want tax law to fit on 4 pages. I wouldn't want a million exemptions. I would want almost no exemptions, no loopholes. Yeah, none of the nonsense that we're dealing with now. I would like to keep child tax credit because that one makes sense to me. Being able to encourage people and empower people to have children, but it would only make sense to have that credit apply to income beyond that 100K. Corporations would be able to have deductions for material costs and employees, but that's it. So they could deduct their business expenses for the materials that they need, and they can deduct their expenses for paying employees, but that's it. No other exemptions. In conjunction with this, for this system to work, I would like to see much stronger, like crazy strong anti-monopoly laws. I do not think that we can exist, and I don't think we can. I don't think it's sustainable to have companies like Google and Amazon. I don't think we can live in a world where Google and Amazon exists long term. It just too much centralization of power, money, and market. So I would like to see some very strong anti-monopoly laws. And then the other piece that I would like to see in conjunction with this is we have to figure out a way of taking money completely out of politics. That's for campaigning. That's for stock trading. We've got to, and it would have to be like for the entire life of politicians thereafter. They cannot benefit financially from their service. beyond their set pay. We could say for the rest of your life, you are going to get the median income of the country plus 10% for the rest of your life. You can't have any other income source. Something to that effect, where because otherwise you're going to have the Elon Musks. As much as I love Elon Musk, and I admire his work and what he's doing, and I know a lot of people feel differently. You cannot have an Elon Musk with that much power and that much money and that much influence on politics. So we've got to figure out a way to get money out of politics. So that's my ideal tax system. With that flat tax, it would mean that the rich can still be very rich, because that is a much lower tax rate than many of them are currently paying. So it still it creates an environment that does incentivize the rich and the job creators and the innovation to be here. But getting rid of all those loopholes and getting rid of all of the deductions means you're not getting out of paying that percent. I also, from a moral perspective, like the idea of a flat tax. It seems much more just and fair to me to have it a percentage that everyone pays, rather than we're going to charge more because you're more successful. Although I do understand that it does get dangerous when you have too much wealth at the top. I don't know. This system seems to make sense for me. What do you think?
It breaks at the thought of first past the post, so it makes it so the first people to an environment get the most out of it. And again, once you start generating wealth in a situation like that, you can expand your wealth generation still in similar ways. You'd have to also still work on that. The whole, if you have assets, you can take loans against those assets.
For sure, that'd be under the loopholes. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I mean, but technically, that's not a loophole in the more libertarian mindset, because if it's yours, then you shouldn't be taxed on it, other than like the acquisition of that. So, so it still has all of those same problems. So you essentially lower the amount of tax revenue with that style of flat tax for everybody. So like the overall government makes less money to spend or reduce the deficits that they are spending. And you are still trying to come up with strong governmental structures to stop people from monopolizing all that wealth, which takes more money to do if you're going to have a stronger tax system. Additionally, you would have to pay all of the politicians very, very heavily, or else you'll never get the best people to try to run in the government. You're just going to get people who otherwise wouldn't have very good jobs, and they're like, oh, I can get a medium income if I go try to become part of the government. And so you're not going to get those best of the best people into the government if they can't benefit in some way.
I'm going to push
financially, unless they're just super moral people.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that one. I think that you don't necessarily want the people in those positions that are driven. The people are driven that way. They can start a company. They can be involved in the capitalist system. People who want to get in politics shouldn't be driven by money. If you have the altruistic desire to serve your country and to not be driven by profit, that's the people that we want as serving as politicians. It should be a sacrifice.
From a philosophical point of view, I agree. But from a practical point of view, I don't know if that would, like, that doesn't necessarily bring the most meritly strong people into play.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who are overseeing all of the other people, I want some amount of meritocratic strength.
I would argue
I do like the idea, like I do like the philosophy idea of the people who want to serve, but the people who want to serve aren't necessarily the best people for the job in all scenarios.
Yeah. Well, you still have elections, so you still have people voting on and competing for those positions. So you still do have some degree of merit. But if you put in it, if you make financial benefit a primary motivator, or if you allow it to be a motivator, that's where you're going to get the corruption. That's why we have the corruption we have now, in my opinion. It is because we have a system that it incentivizes corruption.
Well, it partially, but it also people through lobbying and through the massive dark money donations get the people they want into power.
Mm-hmm.
That still wouldn't change in this system. They would just find other ways to hide it.
Potentially.
Yeah, so it's like and if with that 15% flat tax, there would be again just less money going into the government overall to be able to combat this.
And I'm not convinced that
I'm not
that's
saying that.
I'm not
Yeah, I'm not saying
I'm not
that. Go for it.
I'm not convinced that that's the case. I think that if you had a 15% flat tax and you got rid of all of these deductions and got rid of all these quote unquote loopholes, and you got rid of the being able to take out, loans against your assets, to be able to have a tax-free, source of income. If you closed off all of those things and everyone was actually legitimately paying a 15% tax on all of their gains, whatever source whatever form those gains take, I think you would likely be at the same or maybe even potentially higher in total tax revenue, but I could be totally off.
I'm doing like a 30-second Google search real quick.
Yeah.
Everything that I've read about a flat tax before, if it's under like 23%, I think I don't remember the exact number, but it's in the 20s.
Yeah.
Has indicated that it was going to generate less.
Yeah, and I'm not married to the 15%.
But you did have some other caveats in there that could close some of the loopholes, so that number may fluctuate. But I'm speaking from kind of my general understanding of a flat tax. So I don't know with that exact number that you could probably find a balancing number. Mm-hmm. But another major problem that I run into when I think about a flat tax is, do you understand or do you know the term marginal propensity to consume?
Nope.
Versus marginal propensity to save. So what that means is essentially if you're a poor individual, you spend more of your income back into the economy. Mm-hmm. And what makes a functional economy is that money constantly generating from one step to the next step to the next step. And those essentially that monetary multiplier that comes from the benefit of money shifting around through needs and through other things. As you hit a certain dollar value, or as that dollar value goes up in your income distribution, you tend to spend less money into the overall economy and more money into the consolidation or the marginal propensity to save or consolidate is more appropriate, which then doesn't contribute as much to the overall society's actual benefit of that money being in the system. So a
you
major
need a
reason,
mechanism.
so
you need a mechanism to get that back into the economy.
And so the 15% flat still tends to not address that mechanism of making the money flow through a majority of the system. And so like that would probably be my more high end argument. Yeah. Is when you actually break down the math of how the GDP and the government and this, or not the government, but the spending between people and our economy actually works. Mm-hmm. The more money that is being spent on more things at a higher level tends to be more beneficial for more people. And as that tends to consolidate, you have to then tax where it is consolidating more, or else that lower run of money that keeps multiplying the benefits becomes less and less, and it doesn't go as much.
Yeah. So just thinking out loud, what if you had a flat tax as far as income, but what if you had an entirely separate tax? I don't even know what this would look like or how you would functionally make it work. But what if you had a system that an additional tax that targeted assets, stagnant assets that weren't being utilized in the economy the way that is beneficial?
So that changes the idea of capitalism, I feel. Because like what is a stagnant asset? Like
Yeah,
is
that'd be really hard.
is stocks a stagnant asset, or is it just like yachts?
Yeah.
Or stuff like that. Like, and if that person has a company that he rents out his yacht to people all the time, he's not doing it. Is that a stagnant asset?
Hmm.
But also, like, if you're renting out that yacht to somebody, that's pretty much only going to be circulating in that top 1% of high value people just buying shit and selling shit to each other, which is kind of what we currently have going on.
Hmm.
Because they're buying and selling stocks and to each other pretty much all day long. And I mean, not a lot of them sit on it for a long time, and then they just leverage their own loans and stuff against it. But yeah, and then that consolidation and not contributing that tax money back into the system is why we have our deficits as high as they are, which is what is a major part of the money printing problem, or like the inflation problem, is that we're not getting the taxes that are just kind of floating around in this nebulous area that doesn't contribute to most of society.
Hmm.
Which, I mean, it does to an extent. It just only contributes to like 4% of people that own the majority value of most of these assets that generate wealth.
Yeah.
And so it's that consolidation of wealth and the ability to generate wealth is still really strongly problematic in a flat tax system.
Okay. So what would be your ideal tax system?
So I'm kind of dumb when it comes to taxes. Like I understand some of the mechanisms, but I don't know if I have a great. I don't know if I have like this great new silver bullet adjustment system. But I think it has to be some kind of progressive tax system. I'm not opposed to a heavy death tax, because if we're going to pretend that we're a meritocratic country and that things are earned on merit, I don't know if passing down large amounts of wealth to your kids is actually a meritocratic system. So
And it's not healthy for the kids either.
it will, depending on the kids and how entrepreneurial they are and how much they're trained and yada yada. It doesn't have to be hard on somebody for you to be good at business. So I mean, it makes it easier for bad things, or like for people who are inept, to have access to large amounts of wealth and then ruin a lot of stuff. But I don't know if I'd start just straight make the argument that it's bad. But I think for the overall health of society, I'm not opposed to a larger wealth tax or a larger death tax system. However, that's wildly unpopular because people like to take care of their family, and I totally understand that. But I think if you have a larger wealth tax and a progressive tax structure that makes it so families are able to kind of take care of themselves through certain social means, like if we got better at taking care of people's hunger issues, if we got better at taking care of people's health issues, and we got better at not overcharging people for their education, and our education kept up with the times a little bit better, then I think we could get away with a higher tax system, because I think most people would be okay with a slightly higher tax out of their pockets if they were getting legitimate positive benefits back out of the system. And I do think we have a struggle with that at the moment, but I think there's a balance, and I think we need better systems being funded by probably a similar to slightly higher tax rate, but we actually have to get the response out of the system from that contribution, because as of right now, we spend as much tax from our income as many of the other countries that have free healthcare and free university. And they're not that much worse off than us when it comes to like businesses and stuff like that. They have less billionaires, but they have more people above our median income versus equivalent of spending power. So our middle class is not as strong as some of these other places, but I care more about, and again, there's a balance here too. I do care more about a majority of people having more access to a better life. However, having certain amounts of consolidated power and wealth allows us to have a stronger military, has us allowed to be less likely to be taken over by insert aggressor here. And that's the same for every other country. They have to worry about us and Russia and China just being like, we're just going to financially ruin you. And so, but there's a lot of factors there, like natural resources, the size of our population, the fact that we benefited from war profiteering off of 2 major world wars where we took way less damage than like anywhere else, and we were being paid to rebuild them. So there's a lot of moving parts there that I don't know how to balance. But us being in such a competitive world add some extra layers. But in if everybody was good and people weren't going to try to consolidate and become their own little kings, I wouldn't hate a flat tax. But I don't feel like that works with human nature. It just makes you feel better because it feels, not you specifically, but it just makes, like, I like the moral concept of it because it feels simple and it feels like it's fair. But again, I also, like, with a little bit of critical thought, can make an argument that just because you produce something doesn't make it valuable. And so the ability to produce something isn't that useful unless the rest of society has the ability to actually consume it or enjoy it or have access to it. So the rest of society, there has to be a balance that lets the most people have the ability to consume certain things and have the access to be able to make and do cool things. So I don't know, but I think it has to be some kind of progressive. I think that there should probably be a higher tax rate on corporate tax rates above a certain dollar amount. I think there should be probably less income tax and more of a like a VAT, like an equivalent of like a VAT tax where it's like, or a luxury tax, if you will. But even that has some kind of disparaging outcomes that do the same type of thing as a flat tax. But yeah, there has to be, I think we have to have a little bit less value in ownership and like less of, like, we have to essentially find a way to tax ownership a little bit more and prioritize labor and contribution a little bit more. But I don't have percentages that I think I would know how to work out there.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on the inheritance tax concept. Not that I don't think it's a good idea, but I'm going to give you an example in my life. So my father-in-law, like, I didn't inherit anything and won't inherit anything from my parents. They just weren't that wealthy, didn't have the resources, and I'm totally fine with that. I don't really need or want, anything more than what I have. On the other hand, my father-in-law has a farm that has been in his family for generations. It's hundreds of acres. It's millions upon millions of dollars worth of land, but it doesn't produce millions and millions of dollars. It produces enough money to be supplemental income for him. That's it. He's got like 40 now. We used to be 60 head of cow, and he sells some of his hay. He produces his hay for his cattle. And I'm not going to get too much into the specifics of his situation, but this is a good example. And it could be the same for small businesses that, have a heritage and have multiple generations. My father-in-law, many of these small businesses small comparatively, but still millions of dollars. If they had to pay any significant amount in inheritance tax for that to pass on to the next generation, it could mean the end of that business or that farm. And so if you were to do something like that, you'd have to be very careful on how you structured it, and how you targeted, because that could scale. You could have much larger companies that have very small profit margins, that if you were to charge, it could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever scale you want to apply to it. But if the margins aren't there to pay that tax, what do you do? So it's tricky. So I like the idea in general, but the application would be tricky.
Oh no, like that's one of the headaches of capitalism is when ownership is held in a certain type of way, it makes it very difficult, or like other people, like at the end of somebody's life, it could just go to insert anybody else, the government, whatever. But yeah, I'll say it. That's why I wish there was a better separation between private ownership and labor ownership, like wealth generating ownership. And that's because if you tie your life being to part of your job, or like part of the assets that are your job, then there's this very strong like emotional connection and or fragility that comes with your personal attachment to this stuff, where if it was a more distributed like shareholder stakeholder type thing, like if communities had more, I mean, I'm not trying to advocate for the more socialistic communistic approach, but this is one of those places where it almost shines a little bit better in this type of like a small or like a farm type environment, is if the people that were around that community and part of that living structure and were part of like the building and maintaining of that system, then it would stay as part of that system as long as the community wanted it to be part of that system, as opposed to just an individual like passing it down to their next generation and or they getting taxed out of existence from that. But in a more there's oddities in all of these structures that nobody is going to be fully happy in all of the circumstances. So it's like, I don't want to steal, your family's farm, but at some point, if it's a meritocratic system, your kid didn't make that farm. So is it really fair that your kid gets to start with, a forever farm in their family when somebody else is born on the street and gets nothing?
Yeah.
Well, and again, I'm not trying to say, hey, I want to do this. That's why I said I'm a little too dumb to really have all of those answers, because you're never going to be able to make everybody happy.
And that's exactly why I don't like the idea of trying to use the government to make everything fair, especially outcomes fair. But what you're advocating is more of a opportunity, less of an outcome.
Yeah, I'm all about opportunity, like equality of opportunity, more than I am about equality of outcome. And honestly, I don't know too many people other than the right saying that the left feels that way, that actually believes in, like, if you actually press them on it, that too many people are actually looking for equality of outcome. They want a more equitable outcome, but they're not trying to make everybody have the same like dollar per dollar output at the, for their life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if there's, I mean, when you're in a world with finite resources, it gets challenging to have moral stances on ownership and on wealth distribution and on all that stuff. So it's kind of there's not a perfect solution for any of these things. There's just, do you want to focus more on individual and or family oriented structures of society, or do you want to try to do what's better for a more majority structure, or do you want to try to say that pick insert group here, like rich people or something, like super smart people, and try to give them the most resources to be able to do the most for what you assume is going to be best for society? It's like you kind of just have to make some kind of bad choices on every front and then hope that you can balance them out.
Yep.
Not to sound so cheery about it, but
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think there's any perfect answers, and I agree. I think it's a balancing game between priorities. So I think you're right on. And you and I and the audience might have different views as to what that balance should look like and what priorities we should set. But I think I think you're right. I think we're definitely out of balance right now. So discussions like this, I think, will help us hopefully steer towards a better balance of those priorities.
Here's hoping.
For the audience, is there anything we missed? What do you think that we don't tax the rich enough? Do we need to tax them more? Do you think Kris and I's view as far as there being loopholes is total bull and like the system is working the way it's supposed to? Do you think that the disparity between the middle class and the ultra rich there's no issue there? That's perfectly healthy. There's some people who believe that, and that's not an issue. Add in the comments, tell us what we're missing. And the next episode is going to be interesting because all of this could be for nothing. All of our current views of how economy is supposed to work, how a taxation system can functionally work in the next 30 years, 5 years, could change drastically, all because we're transitioning, not in the future. We are currently transitioning into an AI economy. And that's going to have some drastic effects on our lifestyle and the way that an economy functions. So next episode, we're going to look at what AI is, what Kris and I think the outcome in the near future and the long term of AI means for human nature, what it means for an economy and what an economy with AI looks like, what governance looks like with AI, and how can we make that transition is currently happening very quickly. So the biggest question is, with that outlook as to what AI is going to be and how it's going to affect us, how can we transition in a way that is going to be the least damaging to society and to individuals around the world? So next episode 4, I hope you'll join us, and we'll try to take on that huge topic of AI and what it means for our future. Thanks for joining us.